Okay, I think we're ready to go. So again, good morning to everybody and welcome to the Thames Valley Chamber of Commerce and today's webinar on employee ownership trusts. How do they work in practice? So I'm Narinda Multani, account manager here at the Thames Valley Chamber of Commerce. Our members today, Val King of BFG Associates and Robert Postlewaite of Postlewaite, I hope I've said that right, will be delivering today's webinar, which is being recorded and is available to listen to again via our webinar library. So we'll upload that tomorrow morning. And also I'll ask Val or Robert to put it onto any of their social media channels and tag the chamber into it so you can listen to it again. Okay, so if you have any questions for Robert or Val, there is the chat box. You can post the questions in there and then they will be answered at the end. So yeah, okay, excellent. So I'm going to now pass you over to Robert and he will commence with today's webinar.
Okay, thank you very much, Narinda. Okay, so I'm just going to go to the first slide, pressing my button to see if I can get the first slide to come up. Here we go. Okay, maybe I could just introduce myself very briefly. So I'm Robert Postlewaite from a law firm called Postlewaite. You can see our little logo in the top left-hand corner. There's a pretty strong clue there as to what we do: employee ownership and share schemes. So we work with a range of different companies all over the UK, occasionally overseas, when they want to set up some kind of arrangement to involve their employees in the ownership. And in the context of today's discussion, employee ownership trusts, what that tends to involve is a company whose owners have decided they want to retire from the ownership of the business or retire from the majority ownership and transfer that to the employees using this thing called an employee ownership trust. So just start off by asking the question and then answering it: what is employee ownership? And there are three ways in which employees can become owners of shares in their company. I'm just going to briefly walk through each of these. So the first one, probably the most obvious and the most familiar, is you can have employees directly owning shares in their company. So they'll hold a share certificate. If there's a dividend payable, then they'll be able to receive a dividend and they'll be able to sell their shares in the future. And if they've grown in value, then they may be able to sell them and make a gain. Second, there's a little bit of a delay, I think, between me pressing my advance button and the next slide coming up, so bear with me. Here we go. The second, and this is really what we're going to be talking about this morning, is where you have, instead of individual share ownership, what I call ownership for the benefit of employees. And in that situation, you have this thing called an employee trust, which is the shareholder. And the employee trust owns shares in the company on behalf of the employees, so they don't actually hold shares directly. And then we have a third version. Again, let's just wait for the slide to come up. There's a short delay. Here we go. A hybrid of individual and trust ownership. So in that situation, you have a mix. You have an employee trust, normally holding a majority of the shares, but you also have some individual direct personal share ownership as well. So that's a little bit of context and hopefully sets the scene. But as I say, we're really going to spend a few minutes this morning looking at trust ownership and in particular employee ownership trusts. Okay, so employee ownership trusts have been around since 2014 when they were created by the government.
So Robert, I do realise there is a delay. So if you could maybe use your mouse and click on the screen, do you think that's better?
I'll give that a go. So if I just click on the screen using my mouse, there we go. Still a bit of a delay, but let's see if that works better. We've now got over 400 UK companies that are owned by employee ownership trusts, and the rate of increase in popularity is definitely increasing as each year goes by. Okay, I seem to have lost my next bullet point. Okay, let's keep going. And what the government did was they said, well, if you set up this thing called an employee ownership trust and you sell a majority of your shares to it, then you won't have to pay any capital gains tax. So that's the first of two tax incentives to encourage company owners to create employee ownership trusts. So there's something in it for the owners, 0% capital gains tax. There's also something in it for the employees. Very importantly, if you work in a company that's majority owned by an employee ownership trust, then you can receive an annual bonus free of income tax. There is one very important key condition to that, which is that if you are going to pay employees a bonus and you want it to be tax-free, then it has to go to all employees on what's called the same terms. That doesn't necessarily mean everybody has to get the same. You can differentiate, for example, by reference to what their base remuneration is or what their length of service is. So the next slide tries to show how, in a very simple way, but this is really the essence of it, how the current owners of a company would transfer their shares to an employee ownership trust. And this assumes that they are expecting to be paid for their shares. We do occasionally work with company owners that decide they want to give the ownership away to the trust, but that's not the most common approach. Much more common for the trust to actually pay for the shares it's acquiring, and we'll show in this picture exactly how that works. So just explaining the arrows, what we have in the bottom left is the company, and the arrow going from the company to the employee trust. What that's basically saying is that the company pays some money to the employee trust. And the employee trust will then use that, arrow going up to retiring owners, to pay them an instalment of the purchase price. So normally it will take a few years to pay the purchase price in total to the retiring owners. In return for which, the arrow going from retiring owners to the employee trust, they agree to sell to the trust a controlling stake in the company. So that happens right at the outset. The employee trust buys a controlling stake in the company, but it pays for it over a period of time funded by the company's profits. And the result is, final arrow top right, that the employee trust now holds shares in the company on behalf of the employees. Okay, we're going to have a quick poll, which I think Narinder is going to put up. I think we've got three questions coming up, and this is the first one.
Okay, can everybody see that? Robert, is that okay? Can you see that?
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, people are selecting their options.
Okay, so if you could each complete that. Are we going to look at the results at the end?
We're going to just look at them now. So okay. I think everybody, they're all done. So I'm just going to end that poll. And there you go, that's the results. Okay, there we go.
Okay. I might briefly comment on that, if that's okay. If everybody can see that, employee ownership, pretty obvious really, but the key thing that makes it work as well as possible is when it results in employees who are engaged and interested in the business. So the higher levels of engagement you already have in your company, the easier that is probably going to be. If you've got relatively low levels of engagement, then, and there's some around about 19–20% of companies that have polled have said lower levels of engagement, then you're just going to have to do some harder work on getting your employees engaged. But if you're somewhat motivated, engaged, or highly motivated, then that's a better starting point. But that doesn't rule out any company creating successful employee ownership. Okay, is it okay if I close that and move on? So a little bit about planning, key legal issues, things to think about. So if I can just get these to come up on the screen. First question, who will run the employee ownership trust? And that will be run by people called trustees. You've got quite a lot of scope as to who those people are. A common model is to have one employee, maybe one independent person, and very often one of the retiring owners. But in some trusts, and Val's trust is different, then you might have more trustees and a different range of people. She'll talk about that in a few minutes. Next question, will the EOT retain its shares or will it pass them through to employees? So are you going to have that hybrid arrangement I mentioned, or are you going to have the trust holding all the shares on an indefinite basis, which is simpler? Thinking about your key people, will there be any special share ownership arrangements for them? Do they need a special incentive or reward arrangement involving shares or not? That will depend on your company and your people. What will be the terms of the trustee creating the EOT? Not going to go into too much detail there, but it'll be things like important, but maybe a little bit sort of granular things like what are the rules for holding trustee meetings? What will be the terms of the purchase contract between the selling shareholders and the EOT as the buyer? For example, what will be the time period over which the purchase price will be paid? That's probably one of the most important things. And we always recommend that you get advanced HMRC clearance to make sure that your sale proceeds are going to be treated as capital gain rather than income, because if they're going to be treated as income, there's no exemption from tax available and you're going to be paying income tax, which compared with paying capital gains tax and getting a full exemption, that's going to be obviously the much better route from a tax point of view. And one also needs to think about the company's constitution moving forward. Okay, so valuations. I think we've got another poll, which is kind of looking at what status you are in your current company in terms of succession.
Can you see that okay, Robert?
Yeah, I can see it. Okay. Yeah.
Okay, I'm just going to end the poll now. There we
go. Okay, excellent. Good. Well, yeah, for each of you in any of those categories, I hope this will be pitched at the right level, and I hope we've got enough in there to please everybody. Okay, a little bit more from me, and then I'm going to hand over to Val. So, the question we often get asked is, well, this has been obviously a very unusual year so far. Every business has been impacted in some way. What's going to be the valuation impact on any business? So if I can just give me a couple of seconds for this data to come up. What you'll often see is if you ask somebody to value your company, and you might, for example, ask your accountants to do that, the typical valuation method is going to be based on looking at your profits, what can be relied on as kind of maintainable profit, and then applying a profit multiple to those. And many of you may have come across this particular profit definition, EBITDA, which is effectively profit before interest, before depreciation and amortization. So sort of simpler definition of profit, one that's very commonly used in company valuations. What you might also do, or your valuer might also do, is look at, see if there've been any other sales of companies in a similar sector to you recently, and if they have, at what sort of multiple of EBITDA those took place, and then that gives a kind of benchmark. And we've seen it suggested that there should be a new expression, which is EBITDAC, in other words, an adapted version of profit, which looks at, well, what the position was before COVID-19. So kind of saying, well, this year is exceptional. Let's look at what the position would normally be if we hadn't had COVID-19. But whether you can apply that, I think, is going to depend on the circumstances in your business. So ask some questions. What will be the medium-term impact of the virus and the lockdown? Is it just a blip for you, or does it suggest a more permanent change? So, for example, looking at that in practice, if your business and staff are reduced in size by a third, does this look like a more permanent change and with a greater impact on valuation, or is this very much a temporary thing? In which case, a valuer may well accept that there's no great impact. Similarly, if projects have been shelved in 2020 but are expected to come back in 2021, there'll be a delay in turnover and profits. The valuation may not be impacted too much. One way in which you could sort of address uncertainty in valuation is by having some kind of earn out. So you might, let's say, if the business is valued overall at £1 million looking into the future, you might say, well, there'll be an initial valuation sum of 600,000, and then the 400,000 remainder will depend on whether the targeted profits have been achieved. Or you could consider selling 51 or 60% or some other number less than 100 in the short term, and then sell the balance of your shares at a later date when things have got back to some kind of normal. Okay, well, I'll still be here for questions later on, but now I'm going to hand over back to Narinda and then over to Val.
Perfect, thank you. So I'm now going to hand you over to Val. So Val, over to you.
Hi there. Good morning, everyone. I'm going to spend the next 10 minutes sharing my experiences of our employee ownership transition and explain the benefits of employee ownership. In March last year, my husband Pete and I sold our business, our manufacturing business, to 70 employees via an employee ownership trust. We sold 60% of our shares. And I handed over the role of managing director to our former operations director, Steve, just 1 week before lockdown. So you can imagine the baptism of fire that he has had, but he's been doing a great job. And since March, I set up BFG Associates, helping exiting business owners decide whether employee ownership is right for them, because it sometimes isn't. But if they do decide to go ahead with employee ownership, then I support them through that transition. But first, a little bit of background on the Reflect company. It's just coming through, I think. Yeah, so the Reflect company started with in 1989 with my husband Peter, who's an architect, and he had a lot of clients who wanted to go to extend into their attics, but there were strict guidelines on that and strict conditions. And so the only product that was available, believe it or not, was a Victorian cast iron roof light, which was leaky and drafty. So Pete knew his clients weren't going to put up with that. And a lot of them were solicitors, and he didn't fancy the idea of getting sued by them. So the conservation roof light was born. He designed something that looked like the conservation roof light, the Victorian cast iron roof light, but had modern properties. And since then, we developed a number of ranges in the historic and contemporary building market. But like most architects, Pete decided that he didn't particularly want to manage the business. He's quite a creative person, and I took over in the late 90s, and I'd come from the corporate world. So on to the employee ownership aspect. So like all exiting business owners, and if you're out there, then I feel for you, because sometimes it's a big jump. But we looked at a few options. The first one was quite a common one, passing on to family, but both of our children weren't really interested in that, so that wasn't an option. The second one, which is very common again, is management buyout. Now, it must be said, none of our top team, the leadership team or directors, they didn't approach us. So that was one reason not to pursue it. But the second reason was also because, in my experience, and I've heard a lot of evidence of this, management buyouts not working out that well. They work okay for the exiting business owner, but the team that is left is put under a lot of pressure, especially if it's funded by venture capitalist or private equity. So what happens is that there's a great deal of pressure on the quarterly results, and the team that are left are not used to that amount of short-term pressure to just get the money in. And I've heard of many businesses that had to be sold on quite quickly or even failed. So we decided that that wasn't an option either. The third option was a trade sale, and this was really a viable option because we were approached by one of our competitors, and they wanted to, they found our business attractive because we had a really good relationship with architects, and in the specification market, that's really important. And they did really seem like good guys, they're decent people, but the problem was that their production was in Poland, and we knew that it was very likely that manufacturing would be transferred to Poland, and that meant that many of our people would be out of a job. And so we decided in this process that it was actually becoming more evident to us that protecting our employees' livelihoods was really important to us. And that brings me to one of the advantages. So the tax benefits are a really good advantage. It's nice not having to pay 10% of the sale price, but the employees' protection was really important to us. And that's one of the benefits of employee ownership. A second benefit is passing on our legacy. So again, it was this feeling of, we built up this business over the years, and we had three aspects to our legacy that we wanted to pass on, really. The first one was values-led culture. I had spent a lot of time, we have behaviours for each of our values. We'd really inculcated this into the business, and it was really important to us to retain that. Secondly, innovation. Well, Pete came up with the idea in the first place, but since then we've brought a lot of innovation into the way we do things, the way we manufacture and design, and also the products themselves. So innovation was a second in terms of our legacy. And then finally, long-term sustainability. For over the years, I've felt that, the old axiom of sales is vanity, profit is sanity, cash is king. So long-term sustainability has long been an important aspect to the way we do things and the way we plan and the strategic development of the company. And not just sustainability in terms of profit, but also in terms of the environment. And that's what the company's working on as well, to improve our impact on the environment. So these are the guiding principles which are included in the trust deed, which Robert talked about. And so it's the job of the Board of Trustees to hold the top team to account, to make sure that they're actually delivering on these guiding principles. And sometimes they can be in tension with each other, because it might be that doing things according to the values will not necessarily yield the best profits in the short term. So the Board of Trustees really have to seek to make sure that the top team are actually delivering on these. Now, speaking of Board of Trustees, Robert mentioned there are a number of different models. And another really important aspect of employee ownership is that you get to choose. You know, you don't. Some people have different ways of doing it, but we decided that we'd have 3 independent trustees and 2 co-owner trustees, and then myself as the vendor trustee. One of the independent trustees is the chair, and that's a really important role. And I think we underestimated the importance of that role, because it's the chair's job to make sure that they manage those meetings really well. It must be said that it wasn't easy. I've got to admit that it wasn't easy being managing director, reporting to the board of trustees for the first couple of meetings, because I basically wasn't used to it. Hadn't actually reported to anybody really. It was a bit. It was a bit of a learning experience for me, but I'm glad we did it. And now, of course, I'm on the opposite side of the table, because I'm the trustee, board of trustees. So it's the board of directors who report to us. And the role of the co-owner trustee is really important as well, because they're on the board, and they're thinking about the whole of the company, but obviously through the lens of an employee, which is really important. And so the day that we actually did become employee owned, it was a really big deal. And you know, this is the case for all exiting business owners when you're relinquishing that control. But it was a really joyful day. We spent, I think we had over 20 documents, didn't we, Robert? Quite a lot anyway. But we did manage to do it in half. It seemed a lot of documents, but it was all completed, and then we celebrated. And so what has changed since we became employee owned? So I've asked this question many times to many employees, and one of the most common responses is a feeling of certainty for the future. They feel more secure in the business because it's employee owned, and that makes a big difference, especially in these difficult times. And then they also have a greater say. So it's not just the 2 co-owner trustees on the board of trustees. We have a voice group, or sometimes it's called an elected body, or a council. So we call it the voice group, and so they represent. They're there to represent the views of all the employees in their constituency. And I'm pleased to say that both for the co-owner trustee and for the voice group, we got a really large number of contenders, so to speak. And we had a process that seemed a bit like speed dating, and they had to really convey why they were doing this and what they could bring to the role. So it was very much up to their colleagues to vote for whoever they thought was going to be representing them in the best way possible. Another aspect of being employee owned is communication. You have to have clear communication, and we did this quite well before, but we've really stepped up a lot. And so, for example, transparency over the numbers. James, our financial director, did some presentations on the details of the deal itself, so everyone knows how much Peter and I are getting paid. We're getting paid over 8 years, and so all of those financial aspects are really important to convey. Some do more than others. We just tell everybody everything, including how much cash is in the bank. So it's a good way of really treating people like grown-ups, so that when things aren't going so well, it's not a nasty surprise. And so when you're conveying every aspect of the business, then people sort of can really say, oh yeah, I can understand why that decision was made. So another aspect of it is the voice group and the co-owner trustees were involved in the selection of the new managing director. So that was important. Now I think, Narinder, I think we've got another poll coming up.
Yes, so I will just bring that up. Okay, that's been launched. Okay, I'm going to end the poll now.
Oh, exactly 50-50. Right. I'll be feeding that back to the Employee Ownership Association. I should say that I'm actually on the Employee Ownership Association Membership Council, as is Robert, and we had a meeting yesterday. So I will feed that back. So I would recommend the Employee Ownership Association as a point of reference. There's a lot of data and help on their website. And there's actually going to be a free EOA, it's EO Boost, it's called. Every year there's a conference in Birmingham, but obviously for COVID reasons we're not having that this year. And so I can send details of that conference. It will be on the 24th that it will be launched, so I can make that available at a later date on perhaps via Thames Valley Chamber of Commerce, if that's okay with you, Narinder. So
yes, sorry, that was on mute. Yes, of course, yes.
Thank you. Right, so enhanced performance. So what we talked we had a poll about engagement and motivation, and so the employee sector, employee-owned sector is becoming bigger and bigger. There are 470 businesses, including Aardman Animations, where I've been and met the guys who owned the Aardman Animations, Richer Sounds, and of course John Lewis is probably the most commonly known employee-owned business. And in terms of engagement, this was well before COVID-19, but in the survey that was carried out, 80% were happy to recommend their organisation as a place to work, and 80% were had a sense of achievement in their job. And I would say that these are consistent with the surveys that we've done. And in fact, I think we're when the standard Gallup poll question is, "Are you happy in your work?" and we get normally something in the high 80s as far as their satisfaction is concerned. And in these times when a lot of people are working at home, perhaps 50%. The motivation and engagement of your people is so important. So again, with this aspect of sharing data, making sure that people are happy and are motivated is a key aspect of employee ownership. And in the EO world, we often talk about the EO dividend. So part of that dividend is having motivated and engaged people. But what does that actually mean in hard data? And I have some hard data to present to you. This was research carried out early 2020, so before COVID-19, it must be said. But you can see from here that the combined sales of these are the top 50 employee-owned businesses were up 4.3%. But that compares to 1.2% in the UK economy as a whole. And the median increase in operating profit was up 5%, and 66% of companies had no debt. So you can imagine that helped their resilience in these times when cash is obviously going to be a problem. Productivity was also up 6.9%, and that compares to -1 in the UK economy. So this data, which is carried out by Leeds University, really does show that the enhanced performance of EO companies does make a difference in real terms. And it's my personal experience that EO as an exit route really does allow, firstly I felt really in control of the process. I think that's important to say. Whereas if you're selling to a third party, then you really never know what's going to happen until the final day. So that was a big advantage for me. But I think that what I've experienced personally is that we have been able to protect employees' employment and their livelihoods. We've ensured a passing on of the legacy via the guiding principles in the trust deed, and then there is this enhanced performance. And in fact, the business is doing better than we expected. Because round about, well, I suppose April, things really did shut down. We weren't able to get double glazing panels, for example. We make our own double glazing panels. We just had to shut down manufacture. But then when things started to improve in terms of product supply, we were able to make sales and really sales took off from about May onwards. So from the point of view of the benefits, I've actually seen this, and I believe that it can really help to contributing to something that is a force for good. And I do believe that business can be a force for good, and that employee ownership is one of the best models to achieve that. And so just recommending that you look at the Employee Ownership Association website. Obviously, if you have legal needs, then I would definitely recommend Robert. He was on our team. And also, if you want to just have a discussion or a chat about what it's like to exit your business and sell to employees, then I'm more than happy to do that. That's not a problem. And then tomorrow, I just wanted to signpost this next webinar coming up. It's just coming up. So tomorrow, James Shand, who is our FD, our financial director, and was looking after all the financial elements of the deal, he and I are doing a webinar tomorrow, and so that's on the financial aspects of preparing for a transition to employee ownership. So if you wanted to register for that event, you just need to go to my website and click on the events page. So thanks very much for listening, and I hope that's helped everyone to understand a bit more about employee ownership. And I guess if you've got any questions, then we're happy to take them.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Val and Robert. Okay, so questions, please do post them in the chat box. Okay, Peter Norman, would you think some companies are just too small for EOT to be practical? Example, 4 to 5 staff plus owners?
Can I jump in and answer that
please,
one?
Robert.
So there are some rules if you want to take advantage of the tax benefits, then there are some rules which are intended to ensure that this is only done in companies which do have a kind of minimum number of employees who aren't also shareholders. So you are creating some new form of ownership that didn't previously exist amongst the employees. If you've got 4 to 5 staff plus the owners, depends how many owners there are. So if there are 1 or 2 owners, then you're probably okay. But let's say you have two owners and 4 staff, you'll be too small. If you have 2 owners and 5 staff, you'll be okay, and 5 plus staff also okay. So just to finish off on that question, there's this ratio under which the ratio between owners and employees mustn't be more than 2 to 5. So that's the key thing to remember there.
Okay, thank you. Miles, so your question, does the owner keep control of the company if they sell 51%? And what options do they have with the 49% remaining? Is this generally sold to the trust too?
Shall I have a pop at that one too?
Yes, please.
If you sell 51% or more to the trust, you will definitely no longer have control of the company. The trust will become the controlling shareholder. So it will be able to do things like, for example, decide who the directors are going to be. So if it wants to make changes there, it will have the power to do that. So it's really important to be clear about that. It is possible for an owner who is waiting to be paid for their shares to have some sort of what we sometimes call negative control. So in other words, their permission would be required if the company was going to do certain things, and that enables them to keep an eye on really how the company is spending its money and making sure it's not being used in unhelpful ways, which aren't good for the business, and which mean that they can't get paid for their shares on time. So there are some things you can do to give you kind of a degree of residual control in that way. If you retain a minority stake, the other part of the question was what happens to that. So let's say you sell 51%, you retain 49. Is this generally sold to the trust too? We've worked with a few companies that have done that, and I think the answer is, well, it's too early to tell. Actually, the retired shareholders haven't decided yet what they want to do with their minority stake. But I guess being realistic, the most likely purchaser is going to be the trust, because it's hard to imagine there'll be many other people out there who want to come in and buy a minority holding in a company.
Okay, thank you. Another question: why would an EOT hold shares at the same time as individual employees? Would these be ex-EMI shareholders?
Is that one for me again?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, it might. So that might be part of the picture. So normally, where companies have individual shareholders as well as majority of shares held by the employee ownership trust, that's either because they feel that people in the senior leadership team need to have their own personal ownership stake in order to make it work. Or they feel that employees generally should actually have the opportunity to have some personal share ownership. And the thinking there, I guess, would be that they think employee ownership will feel more real if people have got their own share certificates and they've got something that they can, it feels like their own investment, they can get their own dividend on it, and then potentially, and this is often part of the thinking, if the company grows and grows in value, then employees who hold their own shares will be able to have a personal investment which they might be able to sell in the future and make a gain. So if you want to create some kind of personal wealth in that way, then a degree of personal share ownership might be part of the thinking.
Okay, great. So good questions coming in. So another one: what if the sole owner wants to give any majority of shares to an EOT but doesn't want to retire? What options does he have to still run the company?
Shall I make a start on that,
Yeah,
Val, and then
Robert,
you as well? Yeah, I mean, it's fine to carry on working in the business. The revenue won't have a problem with that. They don't sort of say you've got to stop working in the business if you want to claim the tax reliefs. We often say to them, well, there'll be a handover period, and it could be a few years, or it could be indeterminate, in which the existing owners will work on putting a leadership succession plan into place. But if that isn't clear at the outset and is something for the longer term, that's fine. It doesn't matter. Val, talk a bit more about your experience.
So my experience was I had decided that I would stay for a maximum of 2 years after the deal went through, and in fact I stayed for 1 year, and for personal reasons I just decided that 1 year was enough. And it really didn't, apart from reporting to the Board of Trustees, nothing really changed, because you still have myself as managing director, the leadership team doing their job. I think that the Board of Trustees really helped to challenge us, and so it provided another level of, how can I put it, just making sure that we were actually doing the right thing. And so it really did enhance the overall performance of the business, in my view. So it's perfectly fine to stay on, and we decided that we would actually recruit and select externally as well as internally for the new managing director role, and that was really helpful. And in the end, it was the internal candidate who got the job. So I would say that you can stay for as long as you like, and in my view, it's just basically up to the individual. It's very much up to the individual. Yeah.
Great.
Does that answer the question?
Okay. Next question. We are 2 directors and 8 employees, but will not be retiring for many years as a fairly young business. We are interested in EOT, but is still applicable. But is it still applicable due to the presentation mentioning exiting or retiring directors, etc.?
Do you want to take that, Robert?
Yeah, I think it is, if you're willing to transfer a majority ownership to the trust, if you want to benefit from tax reliefs, then you'd have to do that. You could have an employee ownership trust owning a minority of shares in the company, and that, you know, so if you don't want to, you're not ready to give up control or transfer too many of your shares, you could do that. But the important thing to mention there is there aren't any tax reliefs, so you won't be able to claim a capital gains tax exemption, and you won't be able to pay your employees an income tax-free bonus. But you could still have an employee ownership trust holding a minority and saying, well, look, this, let's say 15%, and this represents a clear statement that 15% of the company is now owned on behalf of the employees. And you could have a profit share each year of 15% of any profits that are available to be shared, which go to employees, representing that the trust has a 15% holding, but just without any of the tax benefits. But that's a perfectly, you know, reasonable model.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
I would add to that and say that I think it does help with retention of people, as well as for getting you more aware of how to engage with people and share information, and help to make them feel part of something that is more than just a boss and employee relationship. And the benefits of that are significant. But I would say that if you were thinking about it from the point of view of can I realise the most for this business, it might be that that to delay that transition might be in your best interest.
Okay, great. Okay, Harvey, so our business has a hybrid model. We found that offering some direct shares alongside a trust has encouraged key team members to stay and feel motivated, and we also offer options to staff we want to particularly reward and retain. So that's, I don't know if that's a question, but I think that's something he's just mentioned.
Information.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Harvey.
Thank you, Harvey. Harvey, could I just ask? I don't know whether you can speak, but as far as the key team members, do they get a dividend? So it's not just profit shared. Do they get a particular dividend? I don't know if you can answer on the chat. But how does it work where you're actually encouraging those key team members to feel motivated and to stay?
Okay, so while Harvey's typing, should we just go over to the next question quickly? Okay, so John, how would benefits reach employees from a trust holding 15% of the shares?
Most likely, the company would pay directly to employees some sort of profit share. So it would be simpler to do that rather than channel money through the trust, and there's a risk that if you do that, it might get taxed twice. Whereas if the company pays it directly to employees as a bonus or a profit share, then that will be their reward on a sort of year-to-year basis. Also, if the company was ever sold, then the trust would sell its shares along with everybody else, so there'd be 15% of the sale proceeds which could be shared with the employees as a longer term benefit.
Great, thanks Robert. Okay, so Harvey's got back to us. He says, thanks Val, yes, we pay a profit share that is subject to tax, and directs also receive a dividend. But more importantly is the increased level of engagement the team have, as you have covered, and the sharing of information allowing the whole team to have a better understanding and behave and feel like true business owners. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That's really interesting.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, so that's the questions coming through. Please do continue to send them. We do have a few more minutes. I'm just going to quickly move over to the next slide. It's a chamber slide, and this actually shows the chamber membership model and it shows the different tiers that we've got in membership, and it shows how each tier is designed to attract a business depending on the level of exposure they wish to gain, as well as savings that could be made. So if you're not a member, do contact us and we can talk to you about the membership and the benefits we can bring to your organisation. A webinar opportunity is one of those benefits. So if you'd like to deliver something and educate our members or non-members on something, then do approach me or my team about that. Okay, so here is the contact details for Val and Robert, and also myself. If you would like to contact them, their email address is there. They're both on LinkedIn as well, so please do connect with them on LinkedIn. They're doing a number of events as shown by Val earlier in a couple of the earlier slides. So, okay, I think we don't have any more questions. Okay, so is there anything else you would like to touch on, Robert or Val?
Not for me, thank you.
No, I think we've covered everything, and that there's obviously a lot more detail that we could share, but I think we've covered the main topics, haven't we, Robert?
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. So as I mentioned at the beginning, this webinar has been recorded and it will be available on our Chamber webinar library. So you can listen to it again and you can share that link amongst your network if you'd like them to listen to it. And we'll also put it on the social media channels as well. So thank you, Val and Robert, for delivering today's webinar. It's been very educational and very interesting and engaging as well. And it's great that you've had those polls set up. So yeah, great. So thank you very much, everybody, for listening in, and do contact us if you have any questions.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.